Hey everyone, this is Paul Smith from Paul Smith Ministry. I want to thank you for checking me out. And on this channel, if you don't already know, I'm just sharing my thoughts about whatever's been grabbing my attention most recently. And today, I really want to talk about this idea of checks and balances. I hope it's something that we all care about and value and appreciate and treasure. And I don't want to be too dramatic or anything like that, but there's been some things that have come to my attention that have made me worried about, where are we going as a society? Both, I see in our government and I see in my own institution, my own church that I work for. And hopefully, this is not something that is going to spread and become a worse issue, and that it won't, not to be too dramatic, but not be too late where a lot of harm and a lot of consequences will result, and it may be too late. So hopefully, as I lead you on the journey that I've been through to where I'm concerned today, hopefully you will share a similar concern, and hopefully this will raise enough awareness to get people trying to push back and not allow this concern to spread and get worse than it seems to already be. So let me begin with what started me on this track was really this previous Sunday. I'm a pastor, so I'm preaching every Sunday, and the scripture lesson. I usually in the Methodist Church we preach from a lectionary, so it's a schedule of scriptures, and so I kind of modified it to my own schedule a little bit, with close to the default schedule. And so I preach from chapter 2 of the Gospel of Mark, and it has to do with a story where Jesus is early in his ministry, but he's already getting attention from these people called Pharisees, who are known for being interpreters and enforcers of Jewish law during Jesus' time. And they catch Jesus' disciples breaking the law and the expectations for that time. And in one case, it was they were picking grain on the Sabbath. So they were breaking not to do work or labor, which was the law on the Sabbath. And so they were questioning Jesus, who is identifying himself as a rabbi, as a teacher, and eventually as the Son of God. So he's claiming to have authority to speak on such matters. And so they're questioning him how he can allow them to break a law that has been in place since the time of their ancestor, Moses. And so Jesus responds, not, I mean, I believe that the disciples and Jesus, they come from Galilee, the poorer part of Israel, while the Pharisees and even they include John the Baptist and his disciples who support Jesus, yet they're following the law, yet Jesus and his disciples are not. And so Jesus and his disciples are from Galilee, the poorer part of Israel, while the Pharisees and John the Baptist and his followers are from Judea. And Judea is a more affluent and privileged area. So those people had more access to the resources that they need to live. So when they choose to follow the law that required them to fast or not work on the Sabbath or any of those things, they can do it because they had a much more comfortable, accommodating life and situation, where Jesus and his disciples come from Galilee, which at that time was really struggling economically, especially with the harsh taxes from the Roman Empire. And so Jesus and his followers were struggling, to have their daily needs met. They relied on generosity of others. They relied on even, we hear these stories, miracle stories, because they needed miracles pretty much to survive the work that the Jesus's mission and ministry demanded. And so they had these needs that needed to be met, and they can't always follow the law because they had needs that weren't being helped. And so even though, you would think that the people of Israel, the people of Judea, the more privileged, they would have a heart, they would care for the needy and the marginalized. But they didn't. They cared more about the law, where Jesus responds to them rather than saying that they're breaking the law out of need. He comes to their defense and uses his authority and claims that because they are in need, they're not doing anything wrong. God cares for the needy, God cares for the least, and God cares for the oppressed, according to Jesus. So, yes, they may appear to be breaking the law in this world, according to the Pharisees, but according to Jesus, they were not. Now, in terms of checks and balances, I look at that like Jesus checks the Pharisees from their understanding and enforcement of the law by referring to a higher power, to God, and his authority as the Son of God. And so, that started to get me thinking about law, and particularly in this passage, it was about the love of the law versus the law of love. And hopefully, according to my faith and understanding of this passage, that Jesus calls Christians to be on the side of the law of love versus the love of the law, like the Pharisees in this story. So that got my mind started to working. And then today I had a small group meeting with some leaders in my church. And, this week is a special week, I guess, in my church, in my denomination. So my church is structured, the Methodist Church is structured where we are divided into regions that are known as conferences. So I'm part of the New York Annual Conference. And this week, clergy and laity leaders are meeting at Hofstra University to discuss the business of the church, to discuss the policies of the church while we worship and fellowship together and all that good stuff. So I was talking with leaders of my church about this gathering, this conference that we're going to be having this week, and how in the past, there were issues that exist today that have existed for decades. And I wasn't aware of how far back some of our issues go back to. And, they were talking about how the same problems or concerns that we face today were just as bad or maybe even worse, years ago. And so we've taken strides to try to improve in that area. And yet there are ways even today that are raising at least my concern about how my own denomination is dealing with the issues that we face. So currently in the United Methodist Church, our biggest issue is our position on the subject of homosexuality. So currently in our book of law, known as the Book of Discipline, the United Methodist Church considers homosexuality as against Christian teachings. And not only that, just to add insult to injury, we do not ordain those who identify themselves as homosexuals, so any of the LGBTQ members. So that's our rule of law. But we know that there have been cases that have come up in the Methodist Church where certain conferences and certain areas of our denomination, even though this is a law, have went against that law and have ordained and have accepted those who openly profess being LGBTQ. And my conference is actually one of those areas that is in support of not following our book of law, which even myself, I'm in support of that. But recently I had some colleagues just sharing an article from the news service of my denomination. And it was a very fascinating article. Some of the top highest leaders in my denomination, either in the past or even still presently, have shared their feedback about what's going on in the Methodist Church. So in the Methodist Church, we had this at the highest level of our governing body. We we organized this commission and appointed leaders to be a part of this commission where they're going to be addressing this issue of homosexuality, because it's such a big issue in our denomination that we're at the point of nearly of a schism and fracturing and even collapsing as an institution. So, a lot at stake here. And not only from this issue, but now this article was raising how in trying to address this demand and this issue that's a really a divisive hot topic in the church. Our highest leaders have been there were accounts in this report about how we have been breaking some of our core values, our constitutional foundation of being what it is to be United Methodists. So they kept showing, point by point, how we have broken what it is to be Methodist, almost to the point of no return. And so they talked about how in this process of trying to address this issue, how we have broken away from our laws and our structure, where a neglect of checks and balances, pretty much, where we have our council on bishops, and we have our judicial branch, and we have our lawmakers, and all these things going on. And the way this process is unfolded, we have just broken the way we are structured and organized as a leadership group. And that's important in the sense of, so we have this book of law, we have this way that we define ourselves as United Methodists, and then we find ourselves not even following that whenever we find ourselves disagreeing with it. And it's a concern of wondering, well, if everyone just starts breaking whatever rule they disagree with, and how far can we go? It's a very slippery slope in the sense, and I totally understand this concept. I mean, I'm on the side of, like, if it's an unjust law, then it's not a real law anyway, as Martin Luther, paraphrasing Martin Luther King Jr. So I'm definitely understanding, just as Jesus corrected the Pharisees when people are in need. So I understand, the marginalized group here of the LGBTQ. And yet at the same time, I wish we can resolve this issue in an appropriate way, in a way that doesn't require us to take actions in such a way that it sets a poor precedent for the future. Like, how can we, return to stability, return to following the law when we are just breaking every policy, every foundational, essential system that we have in place? How can we be credible? How can we be trustworthy? It makes our law, it makes our way, it makes our structure irrelevant, where, what's great about being Methodist, if you go in a Methodist church, hopefully we're in a way unified, that we share this common structure and system and way of existing, that I don't have to question when I'm going to different congregations, that that I'm all of a sudden feeling like I'm part of a completely different church, from one place to the other. Now there's diversity in the church, and that should be reflected in our representation. Yet we should all be unified by, a common system that we all agree upon, and that we agree to work together. Not that it's, the absolute final law, but that it is the starting place, that we strive to return to it, to evaluate it, to assess it, to tweak it as needed. And I do believe that this issue of homosexuality needs to be tweaked. Yet it needs to be done in such a way that we maintain our integrity, we maintain who we are. And so the Methodist Church, what's interesting with our history is Methodism developed in the United States at the same time that that the United States developed as a nation. So it's no surprise that our structure is very similar to the United States government. And it's kind of no surprise then that our government and my denomination share common concerns. As I know, I was looking at a tweet from 2 days ago how our president, Donald Trump, tweets how he is able to pardon himself, and he's referring to the investigation that's currently going on possible collusion from Donald Trump with the Russians. And it's amazing how he's talking about the possibility of him being able to pardon himself, even though he says in the following statement that that he's not guilty of anything. Therefore, why are you even talking about being able to pardon? Why would that even be a thought of yours if you're innocent? But that's neither here nor there for this point. What matters to me is that the idea of committing such an egregious crime, and I hope we agree that if there is collusion, that should be something that we should not accept. That, I mean, no matter where you are on the political side of this, that, you know, committing collusion, if any politician, if any leader of our nation commits this crime, this offense, that we should be against that. You know, we should not think that it's okay for a president to pardon themselves when they commit this crime, and then that's again another bad precedent, another a slippery slope where, okay, if he can pardon himself for this, he can pardon himself for that. I mean, where does that end? Where's the checks? Where's the balances? And that's again where I raise my concern to you all, and hopefully raising your concern and raising your awareness that, you know, as a nation, as a people, as humanity, we should value checks and balances. Our history tells us that it's not good whenever a person in a position of power is not held in check, not held accountable for their actions. I mean, a lot of harm, a lot of damage can be done, and I'm very concerned about my church. I'm very concerned about our nation, and I'm concerned of other parts of our society that may be suffering from this concern as well. So, you know, if you're listening to this, if you're interested in this, I hope however you can, just raise awareness, you know, share this video, do whatever you can to make sure that it's not too late for us to make a difference and hopefully turn this trend around and hopefully get us back onto track to being people of integrity, being people of accountability, being people who are responsible and trying our best to do what is right, and trying to make a system of laws and system of structure that can keep us all safe, keep us all healthy, and keep us all in a good, positive relationship with one another. I hope this is a goal that we all share and can get on board with. So I'm glad that you checked me out today, and then hopefully we can have some more positive messages moving on from this. Okay. Thank you. This is Paul Smith from Paul Smith Ministry, and until next time, peace.